The bass line vibrated through the soles of my shoes as I pushed through the velvet curtain into the main room of Inferno. I wasn't supposed to be here. Architects who specialized in historical renovations didn't usually find themselves in South End clubs at 11 on a Wednesday night, but my client had been insistent. Mr. Chen wanted his new restaurant to have that Moretti vibe, and apparently the only way to understand it was to experience Dante Moretti's flagship establishment firsthand. I'd heard the name whispered in the same breath as warnings. Moretti. The kind of surname that made contractors suddenly remember prior commitments and city inspectors develop selective blindness. But standing here, surrounded by exposed brick that had been restored with obsessive attention to detail and industrial lighting fixtures that somehow managed to look both vintage and modern, I could understand the appeal. Whoever had designed this space understood bones, the skeleton of a building, the way old structures breathed. My messenger bag slipped off my shoulder as I tried to photograph a particularly interesting ceiling beam, and I fumbled to catch it. Papers scattered across the polished concrete floor like autumn leaves. I dropped to my knees, heat flooding my face as I scrambled to gather blueprints, client notes, and the various scraps I'd accumulated throughout the day. "You need some help with that?" I glanced up to find a server in all black watching me with barely concealed amusement. His name tag read, Marco. "I've got it, thanks," I muttered, shoving papers back into my bag with more force than necessary. The music shifted, something with a slower tempo that made the air feel thicker, more intimate. When I stood, bag clutched protectively to my chest. Marco had already moved on to a nearby table where a group of men in expensive suits sat nursing whiskey. One of them looked up as Marco approached, and even from across the room I felt the weight of his gaze. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Strong jaw. Eyes that caught the light like polished obsidian. He wore his black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing the kind of build that came from actual work, not just gym memberships. A thin white scar traced from his left eyebrow to his temple. Dante Moretti. It had to be. I looked away quickly, heat creeping up my neck. I wasn't here to stare at the owner like some starstruck teenager. I was here for research, for my project, for the ceiling beams and the lighting design and absolutely nothing else. I moved to the bar, ordering a sparkling water that earned me an raised eyebrow from the bartender but no comment. For the next 30 minutes, I tried to focus on architectural details, making notes on my phone about the exposed ductwork and the way the original factory windows had been preserved. But my eyes kept drifting back to that corner table, to the man who seemed to command the room's attention without saying a word. When I finally left Inferno, stepping out into the cool October air, I felt like I could breathe again. The club's energy had been intoxicating and suffocating in equal measure. I walked the 3 blocks to where I'd parked my aging Honda, already mentally composing the proposal I'd present to Mr. Chen in the morning. It wasn't until I was home, standing in the kitchen of the narrow townhouse I'd bought 6 months ago, that I realized something was missing. I dumped my bag's contents onto the counter, sorting through the jumble. Blueprints, client contracts, my sketch pad, the takeout menu from the Thai place I'd been meaning to try. But no yellow sticky note. The one with my address scrawled on it, because I'd been too lazy to program it into my GPS that morning. The one I'd stuck to the outside of a file folder. My stomach dropped. It must have fallen out at Inferno, probably when I'd scattered papers across the floor like an amateur. I pulled up the club's website on my phone, found the number, and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. Inferno. The voice was male, clipped, professional. "Hi. I was there about an hour ago, and I think I dropped something. A yellow sticky note? I know it sounds silly, but..." "Hold on." Silence. Then muffled conversation I couldn't make out. A long pause that made my palms sweat. What did the note say? A different voice now, deeper, with an edge that made the question sound less casual than it should have been. "Just my address. I'd written it down earlier today and it must have fallen out of my bag. I'm really sorry to bother you. I just thought, what's your name? Bryn Caldwell. Another pause, longer this time. In the background, I could hear the faint thump of music, the clink of glasses. I found your note, Ms. Caldwell. Something in his tone had shifted, though I couldn't identify what. You can pick it up tomorrow after 6. Ask for me at the door. Dante Moretti. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone and trying to understand why my hands were shaking. It was just a sticky note. Just an address. Nothing worth the intensity I'd heard in his voice. Nothing worth the way he'd asked my name like it mattered. I looked around my kitchen, at the exposed brick I'd painstakingly cleaned myself, at the original crown molding I'd restored. This house had been a steal, way below market value even for the neighborhood. The realtor had been almost too eager to close the deal, had barely blinked when I'd offered $10,000 under asking. I'd thought I was lucky. Now, standing alone in the silence, I wondered what I'd bought. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. I walked through the first floor, checking locks I'd checked an hour ago, peering out windows at the empty street. Hanover Street. A quiet block in a neighborhood that was gentrifying but still rough around the edges. The kind of place where you kept your head down and minded your business. The previous owner had died, the realtor had told me. Estate sale, everything as is. I'd been so excited about the bones of the house, the Victorian details that had survived decades of neglect, that I hadn't asked questions. Hadn't wondered why someone would leave a place like this to languish. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Rachel. How was the mobster bar? Get any good design ideas or just good gossip? I typed back, just design stuff. Nothing exciting. The lie felt necessary, though I couldn't have explained why. I set my phone down and went upstairs to bed, trying to ignore the way shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, trying not to think about the note with my address now in the hands of a man whose last name carried weight like a threat. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams I couldn't quite remember when I woke. But the unease remained, settling into my bones like the old house settling on its foundation. Creaking, shifting, preparing for something to give way. The next day passed in a blur of client meetings and site visits. I measured doorways in a brownstone that needed ADA compliance updates. I argued with a contractor about load-bearing walls. I ate lunch standing up in my office, a converted bedroom in my house where blueprints covered every surface. By 5:30, I'd almost convinced myself not to go back to Inferno. The note didn't matter. It was just an address, easily available through public records. I could let it go. But curiosity gnawed at me. And something else, the memory of that pause on the phone, the way Dante Moretti had said my name like he was testing the shape of it. I changed into clean jeans and a black sweater, tied my dark hair back and applied minimal makeup. Not trying to impress anyone, I told myself. Just being presentable. Professional. The drive to Inferno took 20 minutes through rush hour traffic. By the time I parked, the sun had set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The club's exterior was understated. No neon signs or velvet ropes, just a subtle brass placard beside a heavy wooden door. I knocked, and the door opened almost immediately. The man who answered wasn't the bouncer I'd expected. Mid-40s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He looked at me like he was cataloging every detail for future reference. "Bryn Caldwell?" he asked. I nodded. "Follow me." He led me through the main room, which was quieter during these early evening hours, past the bar where the same bartender from last night was setting up, and through a door marked "Private." We climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor, my pulse accelerating with each step. At the top, another door. The man knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Ms. Caldwell, sir." "Thank you, Cormac." The office was nothing like I'd expected. Books lined one wall. Actual books with worn spines that looked red rather than decorative. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers, a laptop, an espresso cup. The window behind it offered a view of the street below, where evening foot traffic was picking up. And behind the desk, watching me with those obsidian eyes, sat Dante Moretti. He stood as I entered, and I was struck again by his presence. The way he seemed to take up more space than his physical form should occupy. He was taller than I'd realized last night, maybe 6'2", with a lean strength that suggested violence held in careful check. "Ms. Caldwell." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit." I sat. Not because I wanted to, but because my legs had gone unreliable. He settled back into his own chair with fluid grace, and for a long moment, we simply looked at each other. "Your note," he said finally, sliding a yellow sticky note across the desk. I reached for it, recognizing my own hasty scrawl. 47 Hanover Street, number 2. "Thank you," I managed. "I appreciate you taking the time. How long have you lived there?" The question cut through my polite dismissal, sharp and unexpected. "I'm sorry?" 47 Hanover Street. His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes had gone cold. "How long have you lived at that address?" 6 months. I bought the house in April." I clutched the note, suddenly defensive. "Why?" Dante leaned back in his chair, his jaw working like he was chewing over words he didn't want to say. Outside, a car alarm went off, shrill and insistent before being silenced. "Who did you buy it from?" "It was an estate sale. The previous owner died." I stood, the chair scraping against hardwood. "Mr. Moretti, I don't understand what this has to do with—" "Sit down." Not a request. The authority in his voice made me freeze halfway to standing. I sat. He pulled open a desk drawer and withdrew a photograph, old and faded. The colors slightly off the way pictures from the early 2000s always looked. He placed it on the desk between us, and I found myself looking at a young woman with dark hair and Dante's eyes, laughing at something off camera. She stood in front of a house I recognized immediately. The elaborate Victorian trim, the bay window, the iron railing on the front steps. My house. Her name was Leona, Dante said, his voice carefully devoid of emotion. She was my sister. And 12 years ago, she walked into that house and never walked out. I stared at the photograph, at the girl who couldn't have been more than 20, whose smile was so bright it seemed to illuminate the old paper. My throat had gone dry. "I don't understand," I whispered. Dante took the photo back, studying it like he'd memorized every pixel long ago, but still needed the reminder. "Neither do I. Not completely." He looked up at me, and I saw something beneath the careful control. Raw grief, barely contained fury. She was 21, art student at BU. She told me she was meeting a friend on Hanover Street. He paused. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. The police filed a missing persons report, investigated for 6 months before the case went cold. His jaw tightened. Leona disappeared on October 14th, 2012. The man who owned your house at the time was named Vincent Taglia. He had connections to the Russo family, rivals of mine, even back then. I processed this, my architect's mind automatically organizing the information into a timeline, a structure I could understand. You think he was involved? I think Vincent Taglia knew what happened to my sister. But he died of a heart attack in 2018 before I could prove anything. Dante stood, moving to the window, his back to me. The house sat empty for years. The Russos wanted nothing to do with it. Bad luck, they said. Bad energy. Eventually, it went to auction. And I bought it. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He turned, and the look he gave me was calculating, assessing. You bought it 6 months ago. You're an architect. You work out of your home. You have no family in Boston, no connections to anyone in my world or theirs. He rattled off facts about my life like he was reading from a dossier, which he probably was. Either you're very unlucky or very stupid, or you know exactly what you walked into. Anger flared, hot and bright, cutting through the shock. I am an architect. I bought a house that needed work in a neighborhood I could afford. That's it. I stood, matching his intensity with my own. I had no idea about your sister, about Vincent Taglia, about any of this. I just wanted a project, a home, something that was mine. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct impression I was being evaluated against criteria I didn't understand. Finally, he nodded slightly, like I'd passed some invisible test. Okay. Okay, I repeated. That's it? You grill me about my entire life, tell me my house might be connected to your sister's disappearance, and now you're just going to figure out what really happened in that house. He moved back to his desk, but didn't sit. Starting with a thorough investigation of the property, I'm sure you understand. I didn't understand anything. My hands were shaking again, so I shoved them into my pockets. Mr. Moretti, Dante. He said it like a concession. If we're going to be working together, you should call me Dante. Working together? My voice climbed. I'm not working with you. I'm not involved in whatever this is. You became involved the moment you dropped that note. His expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. Look, I understand this is a lot to take in, but you live in the last place my sister was seen alive. Whether you knew it or not, you're connected to this. I'll sell the house. To whom? He tilted his head. The minute word gets out about its history, no one will touch it. And even if they did, do you think that changes anything? Do you think I'll stop looking for answers just because you moved? He was right, and we both knew it. I sank back into the chair, suddenly exhausted. Outside, the city was coming alive for the night, restaurants filling, clubs opening, people living normal lives that didn't include conversations about missing sisters and cursed houses. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Permission to search your house. Thoroughly. He sat down across from me again, and his voice gentled. I've spent 12 years looking for my sister Bryn. 12 years wondering what happened, knowing in my gut that Taglia knew something. Now I have a chance to find answers. I'm not going to walk away from that. I thought about my house, about the 6 months I'd spent stripping wallpaper and sanding floors, about the way I'd come to love its quirks and imperfections, about what it would mean to let this man, this dangerous man, into my home, into my life. If I say no, then I'll respect your decision. He held my gaze. But I'll also wonder for the rest of my life if the answers I needed were buried in those walls, just out of reach. And you'll wonder too. He was manipulating me. I knew that, but he wasn't wrong. When would you want to start? Relief flickered across his features, quickly controlled. Tomorrow. I'll bring Cormac. You met him downstairs, and a couple of others. We'll be professional, careful with your things. I have a site inspection at 9. We'll start at 10. I nodded slowly, still not quite believing I was agreeing to this. Fine. But Mr. Moretti, Dante, if I feel unsafe at any point, if anything feels wrong, I want you gone. Fair enough. He stood, extending his hand across the desk. Thank you, Bryn. His grip was firm, warm, and lasted a fraction longer than necessary. When he released my hand, I felt the absence like a chill. Cormac materialized to escort me out, Appearing so suddenly, I wondered if he'd been listening outside the door. As we descended the stairs, I could hear the club filling up, voices and laughter mixing with the throb of music. "He's not a bad man," Cormac said suddenly, as we reached the main floor. "Whatever you've heard about him, whatever you think you know, Leona's disappearance changed him. Before that, he was different, lighter, after." He trailed off, opening the door to the street. "Just keep that in mind." I stepped out into the cool night air, Cormac's words echoing in my head. The drive home took longer than it should have, my mind spinning with everything I'd learned. When I finally pulled up to my house, I sat in the car for a long moment, studying the Victorian facade I'd fallen in love with. Now, in the streetlight's yellow glow, it looked different. Watchful, like it had been keeping secrets long before I arrived. I checked my phone and found 3 texts from Rachel demanding details about my mysterious errand. I typed back, "Long story. Call you tomorrow?" Her response came immediately. "You better, and I want all the tea." Inside, the house felt the same as always. The creak of the 3rd stair, the draft from the window in the kitchen I kept meaning to seal, the way the radiators clanked to life as the heat kicked on. But I moved through the rooms, seeing them differently now, wondering what had happened within these walls 12 years ago. The 2nd floor held 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. I'd been using the smaller bedroom as my office, leaving the master bedroom largely untouched beyond cleaning and a fresh coat of paint. Now I stood in the doorway of that room, looking at the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself, the closet with its original brass fixtures, the bay window that overlooked the street. Had Leona Moretti stood in this spot? Had she looked out this window at the same view? Maybe waiting for someone? I turned on every light in the house before I went to bed, and still I lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the old building settling. But tonight they seemed different. Tonight, they sounded like whispers. Morning came too early, dragging me from dreams I couldn't remember, but that left me unsettled. I made coffee, answered emails, and tried to focus on the site inspection that would occupy my morning. But my mind kept drifting to the photograph of Leona Moretti, to her brother's grief-hardened eyes, to the fact that in less than 2 hours, he would be in my home. The site inspection went smoothly, a warehouse conversion in Fort Point that needed updated fire suppression systems. I approved the contractor's plans, scheduled a follow-up for next week, and made it back to Hanover Street by 9:30. Dante arrived at exactly 10, bringing Cormac and 2 other men I didn't recognize. One was young, maybe 25, with nervous energy and careful eyes. The other was older, heavy-set, with the build of someone who'd spent years doing physical labor. "This is Julian," Dante indicated the younger man. "And Frank. They'll be helping with the search. Everyone here has been briefed on treating your property with respect." I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. They moved through my home with practiced efficiency, noting structural features, examining walls, checking floorboards. Dante walked slowly, his gaze taking in every detail. "You've done good work here," he said, running his hand along the restored crown molding in the living room. "Original details?" "As much as I could preserve. Some things were too damaged, but most of it cleaned up well." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly self-conscious about having these men in my space. "The kitchen's completely gutted and rebuilt. It was a disaster when I bought the place." He nodded, moved to the window. Leona loved old houses. She was always dragging me to open houses, showing me Victorian trim and original fireplaces. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She would have loved what you've done here." The compliment felt heavy with meaning I didn't want to examine. "Thank you." For the next 3 hours, I tried to work in my office while the sounds of their search echoed through the house. Cormac was systematic and quiet. Frank moved furniture carefully, inspecting behind and beneath. Julian took measurements, making notes on a tablet. And Dante supervised it all, his presence somehow both commanding and unobtrusive. At noon, I went downstairs to find them in the basement, the one area I'd left mostly untouched. The space was raw brick and concrete, with an old furnace in one corner and wooden storage shelves along the walls. Dante was examining the mortar between bricks, his expression intent. "Anything?" I asked. "Maybe." He indicated a section of wall near the furnace. "This mortar's different. Newer, like someone patched it within the last decade or so." Frank moved closer, pulling out a small tool I recognized as a masonry probe. He tested the mortar carefully, frowning. "Definitely different consistency. Want me to open it up?" Dante looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. This was my house, my wall, but the answer might be behind that brick. "Do it," I said. What they found changed everything. Frank worked with surprising delicacy for a man his size, chipping away at the newer mortar with a thin chisel. Dust filled the air, making me pull my shirt up over my nose as I watched from the stairs. Cormac had retrieved a portable work light, and in its harsh glare, the basement looked less like a potential storage space and more like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. "Got something," Frank said quietly. The brick he'd been working on came free, and behind it was darkness. He reached in carefully, withdrew his hand, then looked at Dante with an expression I couldn't read. Dante moved forward, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. He shone it into the cavity, and even from where I stood, I could see his entire body go rigid. "Jesus Christ," Julian whispered. "What?" I came down the stairs despite the part of my brain screaming at me to stay back, to not see whatever they'd found. "What is it?" Dante reached into the space, pulling out a plastic bag wrapped tightly around something rectangular. He carried it to the makeshift table Frank had set up, an old door balanced on sawhorses, and carefully opened the bag. Documents. Dozens of them, yellowed with age but still legible. Photographs. A small notebook with a leather cover. "Don't touch anything else," Dante instructed Frank, his voice tight. "There might be more." I moved closer to the table, my heart hammering. The photographs showed men I didn't recognize, some in what looked like restaurant settings, others in private spaces, offices, warehouses. One shot captured a handshake between two men, both in expensive suits, both looking around nervously like they knew they shouldn't be photographed. Dante picked up the notebook with careful hands, flipping through pages covered in dense, slanted handwriting. His jaw worked as he read, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. "What is this?" I asked. "Who wrote this?" "Vincent Taglia." Dante's voice was flat, controlled, but I could hear the fury underneath. "It's a ledger. Transactions. Payoffs, arrangements between the Russos and various city officials." He looked up at me. "Insurance." He was documenting everything in case he needed leverage. But why hide it in the walls? Because even the Russos didn't know he had it. Cormac had moved to look over Dante's shoulder, his expression grim. If they'd known Vincent kept records like this, they would have killed him long before a heart attack could. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the stuffiness of the basement. So this is what he was protecting. This is why he... I couldn't finish the sentence. Why he might have killed a 21-year-old art student who stumbled onto his secret. Dante set the notebook down carefully, then looked directly at me. "I need to know everything about when you bought this house. Every conversation with the realtor. Every piece of paperwork. Every detail about the estate sale." It was straightforward, or I thought it was. I tried to remember specifics, but it had been 6 months ago, and I'd been so excited about the property that I hadn't asked many questions. The realtor said the previous owner died without a will, no family. The house went through probate and ended up at auction. I bid, I won. I closed 3 weeks later. Who was the realtor? Jennifer Park. She works for Northeast Properties. Dante pulled out his phone, typed something, then handed it to Julian. Find out everything about Jennifer Park and that transaction. Who else bid on the house? Who handled the probate? All of it. Julian nodded and disappeared up the stairs, already making calls. Frank, Dante continued, keep searching. If there's one cache, there might be others. On it, boss. Dante turned to me. You should probably go upstairs. This might take a while. I should have. I should have gone back to my office, buried myself in work, pretended this wasn't happening. But I couldn't move. I stood there staring at the documents that might hold answers about what happened to Leona Moretti, about why a young woman disappeared, about the history of violence that had seeped into the walls I now called home. Tell me about her, I said softly. About Leona. Something shifted in Dante's expression, the hard lines softening just slightly. She was brilliant. Drove me crazy, but brilliant. Wanted to be a painter, but she was actually better at sculpture. She could see things in pieces of metal and wood that no one else could see. He picked up one of the photographs, not from the documents, but one he carried in his wallet. The same girl from the picture in his office, but younger, maybe 17, laughing at something off camera. She was supposed to be safe. I made sure she was safe. And then... I'm sorry, I said, the words painfully inadequate. He nodded, slipping the photo back into his wallet. We'll find out what happened. Whatever's hidden in these walls, whatever Taglia documented, we'll find the truth. The search continued for another 3 hours. Frank found 2 more hidden compartments, both containing additional documents. By the time they finished, the basement table was covered with evidence of a decade of criminal activity. Names, dates, amounts, photographs of transactions and meetings. This could bring down half the Russo organization, Cormac said quietly, studying a particularly damning series of photographs. Judges, cops, city council members. It's all here. Which means it's dangerous as hell, Dante replied. If the Russos find out these documents exist, they'll do whatever it takes to destroy them. And anyone who's seen them. His gaze met mine, and the implication was clear. By agreeing to let him search, I'd put myself in danger. By being here, by seeing what they'd found, I'd become a liability to people who solved problems with violence. You need to leave, I said. Take the documents and go. I don't want any part of this. Too late for that. Dante's voice was gentle but implacable. The moment we opened that wall, you became part of this. The Russos have eyes everywhere. They might already know we're here, might already have people watching this house. Fear cut through me, sharp and cold. Then what do? You let me protect you. He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, something with notes of cedar and smoke. Until we figure out what to do with this information, until we know who we can trust, you need security. I don't need... Yes, you do. His tone left no room for argument. Cormac will stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll move you somewhere safer while we determine our next steps. This is my home, I protested, but the words sounded weak even to my ears, and someone might have killed my sister in it. The raw pain in his voice stopped my objections cold. I won't let that happen to you, too. We stared at each other, the dusty basement air thick with unsaid things. Finally, I nodded, too overwhelmed to argue further. Dante turned to give orders to his men. Frank would transport the documents to a secure location. Julian would continue researching the house's ownership history. Cormac would remain at my house. They moved with practiced efficiency, and I wondered how many times they'd done something like this before, how many secrets they'd unearthed from walls and shadows. By the time Dante left, It was nearly 7. He paused at my front door, his hand on the frame. "I know this isn't what you signed up for when you bought this house," he said. "But I promise you, I will keep you safe. Whatever it takes." "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "You don't know me. I'm just someone who happened to buy the wrong property." He looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "You're living in the last place my sister was alive. That makes you important." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And maybe because you remind me of her. The way you looked at those crown moldings earlier, the way you talk about the bones of old houses. That's how Leona talked about her art. Like she could see something no one else could see." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with Cormac, who settled into my living room with a laptop and a watchfulness that reminded me he wasn't just a bodyguard. He was someone who'd seen violence, who'd probably committed it. I went upstairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and finally let myself process everything that had happened. In the span of 24 hours, my simple life, work, home renovation, quiet evenings with takeout and Netflix, had exploded into something complicated and dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Okay, seriously, what is going on? You've been radio silent for 2 days." I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to even begin explaining. Finally, I typed, "Had some unexpected issues with the house. I'm fine, just dealing with contractor stuff. Talk soon?" Her response came quickly. "This better be one hell of a story when you're ready to share." If only she knew. That night, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my house, the familiar creaks and groans I'd learned to identify over 6 months. But now they sounded different. Now I wondered about all the secrets these walls had witnessed, all the violence and fear that had happened within them. And I wondered about Leona Moretti, 21 and brilliant and full of life, who'd walked through my front door 12 years ago and never walked out. Sleep came eventually, but it was fitful, full of dreams where I wandered through my house and found new rooms I'd never seen before, each one holding answers I couldn't quite grasp. When I woke just after dawn, groggy and disoriented, the smell of coffee was drifting up from downstairs. Cormac was already up, moving quietly through my kitchen like he belonged there. And somehow, in the gray morning light, I knew with absolute certainty that my life would never be simple again. The next 2 weeks became a strange new normal. Cormac remained my constant shadow, a quiet presence who somehow made himself both unobtrusive and clearly visible to anyone watching. Dante visited twice more, each time bringing new questions about the house's history, each time studying me with that intense focus that made me feel both protected and examined. Julian's research had uncovered disturbing details. The probate process had been suspiciously quick. Jennifer Park, my realtor, had connections to a law firm that represented several Russo family businesses. And there had been only 2 other bidders at the auction, both of whom had withdrawn their offers within days of placing them. "Someone wanted you to buy this house," Dante said during his second visit, standing in my office while I pretended to work on a blueprint. "The question is why?" "Maybe they thought I wouldn't look too closely," I suggested. "Solo woman, new to the neighborhood, excited about a project." "Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe they thought anyone who bought this house would eventually find what Taglia hid, and they wanted to see who came sniffing around when it was discovered." The thought made my skin crawl. "You mean I'm bait?" "You were bait." He moved to my window, looking down at the street. "Now you're protected." I wanted to argue, to insist I didn't need his protection, but the truth was I did. Strange cars had started appearing on my block, sometimes parking for hours, always with tinted windows that prevented me from seeing who was inside. Twice, I'd received hang-up calls on my landline, the kind where you could hear someone breathing before they disconnected. The walls were closing in, and we both knew it. "Tell me about the documents," I said, setting down my pencil. "What exactly did Taglia record?" Dante was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing what to tell me. Finally, he turned from the window. "Everything. Bribes to city officials for building permits and zoning changes. Protection payments from businesses. Illegal gambling operations. Drug distribution networks." He paused. "And 3 unsolved murders, all documented with dates, locations, and the names of who ordered them." My breath caught. "Leona?" "Not specifically. But there are entries around the time she disappeared. Meetings with someone Taglia only refers to as the architect." He pulled out his phone, showed me a photo of a page from the notebook. "This entry is from October 10th, 2012, 4 days before Leona vanished. Architect requests special disposal. Cargo arrives Friday." Friday, October 14th, the day Leona disappeared. "Cargo," I repeated, the word leaving a bitter taste. He's talking about a person. "That's what we think." Dante's jaw was tight. "And if the architect ordered it, that means someone higher up in the organization. Someone with enough power that even Taglia didn't use their real name in his ledger. How do you find someone like that?" "Carefully." He pocketed his phone. "My people are reaching out to old contacts, people who were in the life back then. Someone knows who the architect was. We just need to ask the right questions of the right people." "And what happens when you find them?" His eyes went cold, and I saw the dangerous man beneath the controlled exterior. "Justice, one way or another." I looked away, uncomfortable with the implications. "What about going to the police? These documents are evidence of crimes." "Half the names in that ledger are cops and judges," Dante interrupted. "We don't know who's clean and who's dirty. Turning over the documents to the wrong person could get them destroyed and us killed. So what's your plan?" He studied me, and I had the sense he was deciding how much to trust me with. "There's a federal prosecutor in New York, clean by all accounts, with a reputation for taking down organized crime. If we can get these documents to her, along with corroborating testimony, she might be able to build a case that's too big to bury." "Testimony from whom?" "People who were there, people who saw things." He paused. "People like you." I stood, pacing the small office. "I didn't see anything. I bought a house, that's all." "You found the documents. You can authenticate where they came from, how they were hidden." His voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "In a case like this, every piece of evidence needs a chain of custody. You're part of that chain. I could refuse. You could." He didn't move, but somehow his presence seemed to fill the space. "But then what? You think the Russos will just forget about you? That whoever wanted you to find these documents will shrug and move on?" He was right, and I hated it. "When do we reach out to this prosecutor?" "Soon. But first we need more information. We need to know who the architect is, why they wanted Leona dead, and whether they're still active." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's someone I want you to meet. Tomorrow night, dinner at Inferno. She knew Taglia back in the day, might be able to fill in some gaps." "Who is she?" Someone who survived a long time in a dangerous world." He smiled slightly. "You'll like her. She's tough." After he left, I sat in my office trying to focus on work, but my mind kept circling back to those documents, to the word cargo, to the idea that a young woman had been reduced to something to be disposed of. Cormac appeared in the doorway with a sandwich and coffee. "You should eat," he said simply. "Not hungry." "Eat anyway." He set the plate down. "You need your strength." I looked at him. This man who'd inserted himself into my life with such certainty. "Why are you doing this? Why does Dante care so much about keeping me safe? Cormac leaned against the doorframe, considering his answer. Leona was the best of us. Young, full of life, saw the good in people even when she shouldn't have. His expression softened with memory. She used to paint portraits of everyone in the organization, not flattering ones, honest ones, showing people as they really were. She painted me once, caught something in my eyes I didn't even know was there. What was it? Kindness. He laughed without humor. Buried under years of doing things I'm not proud of, but she found it anyway. He straightened. When she disappeared, something in Dante broke. He became harder, colder, focused only on finding out what happened. He spent 12 years looking for answers. Now that he's close, he's not going to let anyone else get hurt along the way. Even a stranger who bought the wrong house. Especially a stranger who bought the wrong house. Cormac's gaze was direct. You're innocent in all this, Bryn. That matters to him. Maybe more than you realize. He left me with that cryptic statement and my cooling sandwich. I forced myself to eat, then spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on the brownstone project that was supposed to break ground next month. But my mind kept wandering to tomorrow's dinner, to the mystery woman who might have answers, to the slow unraveling of secrets that had been buried for more than a decade. That evening, Rachel called. "Okay, I'm officially worried," she said without preamble. "You've been ghosting me for 2 weeks. What's going on?" I looked at Cormac, who was reading in my living room, then stepped out onto my small back patio where I could speak privately. It's complicated, Rach. House stuff that turned into more than house stuff. Are you in trouble? Do you need help? I'm not in trouble, I lied. Just dealing with some unexpected issues. I promise I'll explain everything soon. She was quiet for a moment. You'd tell me if you were in danger, right? The question made my throat tight. Right. After we hung up, I stood in the cooling October air, watching shadows lengthen across my small yard. Somewhere in this city, someone was watching, waiting to see what I do with the information hidden in my walls. And somewhere, maybe, the person who'd ordered Leona Moretti's death was going about their life, confident that their secrets would remain buried. But secrets had a way of surfacing, especially when someone like Dante Moretti refused to let them stay hidden. Inferno looked different on a Tuesday evening. Less crowded, more intimate, with low lighting that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. Dante met me at the door, nodding to Cormac who'd driven me, then guiding me through the main room to a private alcove in the back. A woman sat alone at the table, nursing a glass of wine. She looked to be in her early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and her posture suggested both grace and wariness. Isolde, Dante said. This is Bryn Caldwell. The woman extended her hand, her grip firm and appraising. The architect who bought Vincent's house. I've been hearing about you. We sat, and Dante ordered wine for me, whiskey for himself. Isolde waited until the server had disappeared before speaking again. Dante tells me you found Vincent's insurance policy. Her voice carried a faint European accent I couldn't place. German, maybe, or Austrian. That must have been quite a shock. That's one way to put it. I sipped the wine, grateful for something to do with my hands. He also said you knew Taglia. I knew everyone back then. A slight smile curved her lips. I was the person you called when you needed information. Who was sleeping with whom? Who was skimming profits? Who was planning to turn informant? I made it my business to know things. And you worked for the Russos? I worked for myself, she corrected. I provided information to whoever paid the best, including, occasionally, Vincent Taglia. Dante leaned forward. Tell her about the architect. Isolde's expression grew serious. The architect wasn't a person. It was a title, given to whoever was orchestrating the Russo family's expansion into legitimate businesses. Real estate development, construction contracts, city planning, all funneling dirty money into clean projects. Understanding dawned. And Leona found out about it. That's why she was killed. That's my theory. Isolde swirled her wine. Vincent was sloppy, kept too many records. I warned him, but he was paranoid, needed insurance. Leona must have seen something. Documents, maybe, or photographs. Something that connected the architect to specific crimes. Who was it? I asked. Who was the architect? Isolde met my gaze directly. That, my dear, is the question everyone wants answered. Because whoever held that position 12 years ago might still be in power, and they've had a dozen years to bury their secrets deeper. A chill ran through me. Then we're looking for someone who's been planning this for years, who knew those documents existed and wanted them found. Maybe. Dante's jaw was tight. Or maybe they thought the documents were destroyed with Talia. Maybe finding them was an unpleasant surprise. Either way, Isolde said, you're in danger. All of you. The moment word spread that those documents surfaced, people started asking questions. Dangerous people. I've noticed, I said dryly, thinking of the cars watching my house. Isolde reached into her bag and withdrew a small flash drive, setting it on the table between us. This contains everything I know about the architect's operations. Names, dates, business dealings. It's not proof of murder, but it might help you connect the dots. Consider it my contribution to finally putting this ghost to rest. Dante picked up the drive, his expression unreadable. Why help us now, after all these years? Because Leona Moretti painted my portrait once. Isolde's voice softened. She was just a kid, sitting in my gallery, and she asked if she could paint me. Said I had interesting shadows. I let her, thinking it would be a harmless diversion. She smiled at the memory. She painted me as I was, a woman who'd done terrible things but still had some beauty left. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever given me. She stood, gathering her bag. Find who killed her, Dante. And when you do, make sure they face justice. Real justice, not just the kind that ends with a bullet. After she left, Dante and I sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of what we'd learned pressed down on us. The architect could be anyone, I said finally. A developer, a city official, someone in the Russo organization itself. We'll narrow it down. Dante pocketed the flash drive. Julian's good with data. He'll cross-reference Isolde's information with what we found in the walls. Someone's name will surface. And then? Then we build a case so airtight that even corrupt officials can't bury it. He looked at me, his dark eyes intense. But I need to know you're in this, Bryn. Really in this. Because once we start pulling threads, there's no going back. I thought about Leona Moretti, 21, and painting portraits that revealed truth. I thought about my house, built on secrets and violence. I thought about how my simple life had intersected with something larger, something that demanded I make a choice. I'm in, I said. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. Thank you. We left Inferno together, stepping out into the October night. Cormac was waiting with the car, but Dante waved him off. I'll drive her home. You head back to your place. Get some rest. Cormac looked surprised but didn't argue. After he pulled away, Dante led me to a different car. A dark blue sedan, understated, with none of the flash I'd expected. You don't drive the Bentley? I asked, as we slid into the leather seats. Only when I need to remind people who I am. He started the engine. Most of the time, I prefer to blend in. The drive to my house took 15 minutes through quiet streets. We didn't talk, but the silence was companionable rather than uncomfortable. When he pulled up to my curb, he didn't immediately let me out. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "Why architecture? Why old houses?" The question surprised me. They have stories. Every building has a history, layers of people who lived and worked and loved inside its walls. When I restore something, I'm not just fixing broken beams, I'm preserving memory. He nodded slowly. Leona would have understood that. She felt the same way about art. "Tell me more about her," I said. "Not about the investigation, about her. What was she like?" Dante was quiet for a moment, his hand still on the steering wheel. She was chaos and light. Could never keep her room clean, always had paint on her clothes. But she saw the world differently than everyone else. She'd find beauty in rust stains and broken glass. His voice grew soft. She made everyone around her better just by being there. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you. Your whole approach to this, calm, methodical, but with passion underneath. That was her too. We sat in the car, neither of us moving to leave. Outside, my house loomed, Victorian and beautiful and full of secrets. "Dante," I said quietly, "what happens if we find out who the architect is and they're untouchable? Someone with too much power, too many connections. Then we expose them anyway." His voice was hard. Power doesn't make someone immune to consequences. It just makes those consequences harder to deliver. I finally opened the door, stepping out into the cool night. "Thank you for dinner, and for letting me be part of this." "You're already part of it, Bryn." He smiled slightly. "You became part of it the moment you dropped that note." As I climbed my front steps, I heard his car pull away. Inside, the house was dark, empty now that Cormac had been given the night off. I turned on lights, checked locks, went through the routine I'd developed. But I knew that nothing about my life was routine anymore. I'd stepped into someone else's tragedy, inherited their unfinished story, and now I couldn't leave until I knew how it ended. In my office, I pulled out the files I'd started keeping, copies of documents from Dante, notes from conversations, a timeline I was constructing. I added tonight's information from Isolde, drawing connections between names and dates. Somewhere in this web of information was the truth about what happened to Leona Moretti, and I was going to help Dante find it. 3 weeks after my dinner with Isolde, Julian finally made the connection. I was in my office, working on a proposal for Mr. Chen's restaurant, the project that had started this whole chain of events, when my phone rang. "We found him," Dante said without preamble. "The architect. Can you come to Inferno?" I was there in 20 minutes, my heart hammering the entire drive. Cormac let me into the private office where Dante, Julian, and Frank were huddled around a laptop, their expressions grim. "Thaddeus Voss," Dante said, turning the laptop so I could see. City Planning Commissioner in 2012, now a senior partner at Voss & Associates, one of the biggest development law firms in Boston. I studied the photo on screen, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, shaking hands with the mayor at some charity function. He looked respectable, successful, completely ordinary. "How did you connect him?" I asked. Julian pulled up a series of documents. Isolde's information showed shell companies used to funnel Russo money into development projects. I cross-referenced them with city planning approvals from 2012. Voss's signature appeared on every single permit for properties owned by those shell companies. "That's not enough for murder," I said. "No." Dante's expression was dark. "But this is." He pulled up a photo from Taglia's hidden cache, the one showing a handshake between two men. Julian had enhanced the image, sharpening the features that had been blurred in the original. One man was clearly Vincent Taglia. The other, barely visible in profile, was Thaddeus Voss. Now look at the date stamp. Julian pointed to the corner of the photo. October 14th, 2012, the day Leona disappeared. My breath caught. He was there, at my house, meeting with Taglia about something important enough to photograph. Dante's voice was controlled, but fury simmered underneath. And according to Isolde's notes, that was the day a large payment was made to one of Voss's shell companies. Call it a coincidence, but there's no such thing as coincidence, I finished. Frank pulled out a thick folder. We've also got testimony from 2 people who were in the Russo organization back then. Both say the architect was untouchable, that he had connections high enough to make people disappear without questions. Voss fits the profile, Cormac added. Access to city planning, connections to both legitimate business and organized crime, and enough power to bury evidence. So what do? I asked. We can't just accuse him. He'll deny everything, use his connections to make the documents disappear. That's where you come in. Dante turned to me. I spoke with the federal prosecutor in New York. She's interested, but she needs more than documents and testimony. She needs the physical location where the documents were found, authenticated by the property owner. You want me to testify? I want you to tell the truth about what you found in your house. His gaze was steady. With your testimony, the prosecutor can establish chain of custody. Combined with Isolde's information and witness statements, she thinks she can build a RICO case that includes Voss and several other Russo associates. I thought about what that would mean, becoming a federal witness, possibly entering protective custody, having my face and name associated with bringing down a criminal organization. My quiet life as an architect would be over. But I thought about Leona too, about the portrait of Isolde that captured truth, about a young woman who'd seen something she shouldn't have and paid with her life. When? I asked. Relief flooded Dante's features. Next week. The prosecutor wants to meet with all of us, review the evidence, start building the case. Will I be safe? Yes, his voice was absolute. I promise you, Bryn, whatever happens, you'll be protected. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Dante moved me out of my house to a secure location, a condo in Cambridge owned by one of his legitimate businesses. Federal marshals reviewed my security, took my statement, photographed the hiding places in my basement. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Reyes, asked 1,000 questions and seemed satisfied with my answers. This is good, she told Dante during one meeting. With the documents, the witness testimony, and Ms. Caldwell's authentication, we can move forward with indictments. But the night before the grand jury was set to hear evidence, everything went wrong. I was in the Cambridge condo, reviewing my testimony one more time, when Cormac burst through the door. We need to move, now. What happened? Voss knows. Someone tipped him off about the investigation. He was already grabbing my coat, my bag. He's got people looking for you. We have to get you somewhere safe until the marshals arrive. We were halfway down the stairs when the first shots fired. The window above us shattered, glass raining down. Cormac pushed me against the wall, his body shielding mine, as more bullets tore through the building. I could hear shouting, footsteps pounding up the stairs below us. Back door, Cormac said. Move. We ran through the condo's service hallway, Cormac ahead of me, gun drawn. At the back exit, a black SUV screeched to a halt. Dante jumped out, along with Frank and 2 men I didn't recognize. Get in, Dante ordered. I dove into the back seat, Cormac right behind me. Dante took the wheel, and we peeled out as more shots rang out behind us, several of them striking the SUV's reinforced panels with dull thuds. Where are we going? I gasped. Inferno. It's the most secure location I have until the marshals can regroup. The drive took 15 minutes of high-speed maneuvering through Cambridge and Back Bay. When we finally pulled into Inferno's private entrance, My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfasten my seatbelt. Inside, Dante led me to his office, closing the door behind us. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, still trying to process what had just happened. "They tried to kill me." "They tried." His voice was hard. "They failed." He poured me a drink, whiskey, neat, and I downed it in one swallow, welcoming the burn. Outside his office, I could hear his people moving, securing the building, preparing for a potential attack. "How did Voss find out?" I asked. "We're working on that. Someone in the prosecutor's office, maybe, or someone connected to the grand jury." He refilled my glass. "But it doesn't matter now. Once Voss moved against you, he confirmed his guilt. The prosecutor has enough to arrest him tonight." "Will it stick? The charges?" "With the evidence we have? Yes." He sat beside me on the small sofa, close enough that I could feel his warmth. "This ends tonight, Bryn, one way or another." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the club below us, the thump of music and hum of conversation. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the violence that had nearly claimed me an hour ago. "I'm sorry," Dante said finally. "I brought you into this. If I hadn't asked you to help, I made the choice." I turned to face him. "You gave me the option to walk away, and I stayed. That's on me." His eyes searched mine, looking for something. "Why did you stay? You could have sold the house, moved on, let me handle it." "Because Leona deserved better than being forgotten." The words came out before I'd really thought about them. She was 21 and talented, and someone took that away from her for no reason other than being in the wrong place. If I could help give her family answers, give you answers, that mattered more than my safety. Something shifted in his expression, the careful control cracking. "You sound like her. Like Leona. She would have done the same thing. Tell me I did the right thing." "You did." He reached out, his hand covering mine. "Thank you. For everything." His touch was warm, grounding. I realized how close we were sitting, how the space between us had somehow shrunk, how his eyes had gone soft in a way I'd never seen before. "Bryn," he said quietly. The door burst open. Catherine Reyes strode in, flanked by federal marshals. "We have Voss in custody," she announced, along with 3 associates who tried to silence Ms. Caldwell. "They'll be arraigned in the morning on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Relief crashed over me. "It's over?" "The immediate threat is over." She sat across from us, professional but not unsympathetic. "But I'll need your continued cooperation. The trial will take months, possibly a year. You'll need protection during that time." Dante's hand tightened on mine. "She'll have it." Catherine's gaze moved between us, something knowing in her expression. "I'm sure she will." The trial lasted 14 months. In that time, Thaddeus Voss and 6 other members of the Russo organization were convicted on multiple counts, including Leona Moretti's murder. The evidence was overwhelming: documents, testimony, and finally, a confession from one of Voss's associates who agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Leona had witnessed a meeting between Voss and Taglia, had photographed documents she found in my house, then Taglia's house, that proved the architect's identity. Voss had ordered her silenced, and Taglia had complied, desperate to protect his position in the organization. For his cooperation with federal prosecutors, Dante negotiated immunity for himself and his inner circle. He closed down the criminal side of his operations, focusing exclusively on his legitimate businesses. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was a start. As for me, I sold my house on Hanover Street. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't walk through rooms that had held so much violence. Instead, I bought a different project, a Queen Anne Victorian in Jamaica Plain that needed work, but had only good history. Dante helped me move. By then, we'd spent so much time together. Testimony prep, meetings with prosecutors, long evenings when I needed someone who understood what I'd been through. That it felt natural to have him in my life. New beginning? He asked, standing in my empty new living room. Fresh start, I agreed. He moved closer, and I didn't step away. I've been thinking, he said, about what comes next. For me, for the businesses, for everything. And I'd like you to be part of it. He smiled slightly. Not just as a friend, as more, if you're interested. I thought about the past year and a half, about how this complicated, dangerous man had become someone I trusted, how he'd kept his promises, protected me, helped me find the courage to testify even when I was terrified, how he'd shared his grief over Leona and slowly, painfully, started to heal. I'm interested, I said. He kissed me then, and it felt like coming home. 1 year later, we stood in front of a small group of friends and family. Cormac, Frank, Julian, Rachel, who'd finally gotten the full story, Catherine Reyes, who'd become an unexpected friend, and promised to build a life together. It wasn't a traditional love story, but then, nothing about us had ever been traditional. That night, in the renovated Queen Anne that was now our home, I found Dante in what we called Leona's room. A small space we'd dedicated to her memory, filled with her paintings and sketches that his mother had saved. She would have liked you, he said, looking at the portrait of Isolde, at the way Leona had captured truth in brushstrokes and shadow. She would have loved that you helped give her justice. I took his hand. I didn't do it alone. No. He smiled, pulling me close. But you did it. That matters. We stood there together, looking at Leona's art, at the beauty she'd found in a broken world. And I understood then what she'd been trying to show, that even in darkness, even in the middle of violence and fear, there was still light to be found. You just had to be brave enough to look for it.